Good evening, everybody. This is Mark Vines, and welcome to the Mark Vines Show. We have an exciting edition for you tonight. We have Dr. Rick Kiper with us here tonight. We're going to be talking about some things that he's been involved in, whistleblower complaint and retaliation, and just the different saga, if you will, that Rick has been involved in over the years. And I think that you'll find that this is very, very interesting and kind of telling of the times. And it really is just a way for our listeners to really just sit back and think about the world at large, what's going on in the country, and how we really need to take a look at our systems. And by systems, I mean the FBI, Department of Justice, and the government at large. And hopefully today's podcast will give you some thought and pause about how to look at things and how to look at the world and what can happen and the freedoms that you can lose if you're not careful. So Rick and I go back at the academy. I've talked about this before. I retired as an FBI agent, spent most of my adult life with the FBI. And part of that time I was down at the academy teaching. And for those of you that don't know this, but the academy, the FBI Academy, has a number of different units and different sections that don't necessarily interrelate with one another. And one of the programs is the National Academy, which is for police executives, leadership program for police executives. And then, of course, we have training for employees, new agents, analysts, and all of the other professional support that the FBI has. And at the time I was at the academy, Rick was on that side. He was teaching the FBI employees, whereas I was over on the National Academy side. So we knew each other, and I was aware of the situation that we're going to talk about today. And I'll interject at some points and talk about what my perceptions and what my knowledge was. But Rick is going to be talking to us about what happened to him and things that we really you just need to think about how these processes affect the things that you're seeing in the news today. But it's a very interesting story. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Rick Kiper, and he can tell you a little bit about himself and what happened. So, Dr. Kiper, welcome.
Well, thank you very much, Mark. I appreciate this, and I appreciate the opportunity to share my story. One of the reasons why I do share my story is not that the FBI is going to provide me a remedy for what they did, but going forward, I'm hoping that it'll help people in the future if they want to raise concerns. And as a result of my case, actually things have gotten better. Measurably better, and so we can get into that a little bit. What has resulted from the case. So I entered the FBI in '99. Loved everything that I did and all the positions that I served. I went to FBI headquarters for a while. I served as assistant legal attaché in San Salvador. I was a CFR coordinator in Miami. I did a lot of great investigations, worked with a lot of great people. So I don't want to impugn, all of the FBI with what I'm about to share, because by and large, the brick agents or the people on the ground at the pointy end of the spear, they're really, really good people. I mean, you and I have worked with these folks. And even when I was a unit chief and supervising instructors that instructed National Academy and new agents and new analysts, they're just very, very good people. But at the top of the FBI, there's some real problems. And so one of the, I guess I could just share how the story started with me. I was assigned to the FBI Academy as a unit chief in 2011, and I was the first unit chief to come under a 3-year rule for term limits. The position was term limited, so it was a 3-year term, and so I knew that at the end of 3 years I would have to look for something else. But during my time in the FBI Academy, I was the unit chief of the what was then called the Investigative Training Unit. And during that time, my unit and myself noticed some things going on with the training academy that just wasn't right. One of the things that happened right before I got there, for example, was a giant reorganization. And so the leadership of the FBI Academy gave everybody an org chart. And then there were some complaints about that. So they put the org chart in a PowerPoint slide, and then they put it into a flip book. And then, but they never actually described what each unit was supposed to do, what, scope of work, how they're supposed to interact with other units, to be able to, create and deliver instruction. And so that's kind of my background. I have 4 degrees in education. And so I spoke up and said, I could help kind of iron this out and make it a little more clear. But they weren't having any of that. That's one of the things where I got into trouble. Another aspect at the FBI Academy that I kind of rose my hand about was they were building a brand new building called the Investigative and the ITSE, Investigative and Analysis Training Center.
I think it was Investigative Intelligence
and Intelligence Training Center. Yeah, that's right.
IITC. Yeah,
IITC. Right. I just call it the ITSE building, but one of the problems with that building is that they're going to make the whole thing a SCIF. And they ended up doing that, but I objected to that because, one, my unit was going to be placed in there.
And by the way, just so the listeners know, sure, that stands for Secret Compartmentalized. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's Secret Compartmentalized Information Facility.
Right. Which is really locked down. Yeah, just so there's going to be a lot of listeners that won't know that acronym, but yes. SCIF is what that stands for.
Right. Well, thanks for reminding me. So what a SCIF entails, I mean, that's where we handle our top secret information, if you will. A lot of what the FBI deals with is secret information or in class. But the top secret information requires greater controls. And to work with that information sort of out in the open, you need to have one of these SCIF facilities to do it. And it requires a lot more of a build out in terms of the infrastructure and the shielding for radio waves and all that kind of stuff. It's very expensive. But my objection to this, I mean, that wouldn't be a bad thing if we had a need to make the whole building a SCIF. But the people that they were putting into that SCIF, the units, to actually live and work there, had no need for that. And as a matter of fact, I had to run most of my unit, get them SCI or Secret Compartmentalized Information certified, get them read in needlessly, which is a big no-no, just so they can sit in that SCIF. None of us, neither one of our units ever handled top secret information. It also required them to put in $1 million more equipment to handle the top secret information. So that was all bad enough, but then the leadership decided to tell me and the other unit chief, hey, you need to assign your supervisors, your supervisory special agents that are making, I don't know, $70 an hour plus, to actually escort janitors into that building because the janitors were not cleared, or anybody working in that building, air conditioner, roofers, anybody had to be escorted, and they wanted us to assign our supervisors to escort these people, which is crazy. I mean, a huge loss of time and productivity. Setting aside the fact that anybody going into that building had to leave their cell phones behind, and at the entrance of the building and lock those up, and so students can't communicate with us through that. So it was just a big mess, and so I raised that as an objection. I wrote actually a little white paper describing how much waste. I mean, I said this was the definition of government waste. And then the third thing that I spoke up about was this blatant lie that our leadership told the Office of Management and Budget, or OMB. Back in 2012, they had the idea of sending new agents to be trained at the other federal law enforcement training center called FLETC, where everybody else gets trained. All the other federal law enforcement officers, or DHS, and all the rest of them, except for FBI and DEA, they're all trained at this facility. So they wanted us to move new agent training to that facility. And someone on the 7th floor, which means someone in the leadership of the Hoover building, told them that we couldn't do that. We could not do that because our analysts and our agents training were integrated together, and they were so integrated in our training that to take agents away and send them to FLETC, that would just absolutely break our training program. That was a complete lie. There was no integration whatsoever at that time. And I spoke up about it. I have emails where I questioned the ethics of it. And as a matter of fact, the assistant director at the time was concerned that we didn't have enough new analysts to sit in a classroom with new agents to make it even seem like they're integrated. So he was going to take onboard analysts and bring them down to Quantico to sit because OMB wanted to come and see what this integration was all about. So then the task was, well, how do we create this false classroom in order to convince OMB that we actually have the integrated training that we did not? So those were issues that I actually, I guess I got a reputation a little bit of being a troublemaker, but I just didn't think it was right, and I wouldn't participate in that aspect of it. And so a few months later, this is in 2012, we learned that there was an unscheduled inspection of the FBI Academy or Training Division. It was not on. It was not on the schedule. It was not on the rotation. It was simply called specially for Training Division. And from folks that I've spoken to, it was very, very targeted to remove specific people from the Training Division, including my own section chief, myself, and several other unit chiefs. So the inspection happened, and sure enough, they quote unquote found enough facts to support a loss of effectiveness finding for myself and two other unit chiefs and a section chief. I mean, it worked perfectly for them. Unfortunately, in my case, the facts that they found were completely made up. They were absolutely fictitious. And, Mark, you and I have been through inspections before. If there are preliminary findings, a lot of times the inspectors will sit down with the accused, if you will, and say, "Hey, can you mitigate this? These are some issues that we're seeing. Can you mitigate this? Can you provide us the documentation that we couldn't find in the case files or whatever it is?" And in this case, there was no such meeting happened in this particular case. They basically came in. They conducted interviews, they collected documents, they made up a bunch of facts, and wrote up a loss of effectiveness findings for us four, and left. I mean, there was no answering it, nothing.
And by the way, not only in my career was I under the gun, so to speak, in inspections myself, but I actually participated in an inspection. And what you were describing is is the way that it has been done in the past, where initially the inspector will come in and tell you what they're looking at, and then you are inspected, and then there are findings, and then they sit down with you just to make sure that what they discovered is in fact what they found, and then they go on from there. And that's typically how it's done, or that is how it's done. But it was not. This was a very unusual case,
Yes.
because they came in again, like you mentioned, it was not scheduled. They came in, they did an inspection, and left, and then came back with discipline, as it were. Correct. Mm-hmm. So there was a whole lot that was missing compared to every other inspection I had ever seen done in the FBI. This was very unusual.
Yes. And the loss of effectiveness finding, just so your listeners know, is a finding from Inspection Division. At least at that time, Inspection Division was handing these out. Basically, it says that the recipient of a loss of effectiveness finding has lost their effectiveness to lead in that particular position, and of course, they say, well, it may not even be the fault of the person. It could be like the situation or whatever. But the fact is, they give you a loss of effectiveness finding, and you are removed from your position. Now, it's not supposed to be a demotion. And the other unit chiefs and section chief, they all had the option of moving laterally to another position. For me, what they did is, if you recall that 3-year term that I had signed up for, they ended my term prematurely. And so, and this is how it was explained to me. Instead of giving me the opportunity to be a unit chief someplace else, they prematurely ended my term. And then as a result of that, I was demoted from a GS-15 to a GS-13. I was obviously removed from my position. And I was removed from EDSP, which is the employee system where you apply for other jobs. I was removed from that system altogether, which is not allowed under the policy for ending term. So in other words, you come to the end of your term in the FBI, and if it's a term position, and the policy states that you are actually allowed to apply for other positions and get other positions that you're in the pipeline for. I was actually the number one candidate for Ligat Bogota because I had already applied, because I already knew that, at the end of my 3 years, I was going to be leaving. So I had already applied for Ligat Bogota, and I actually had my interview, that pro forma interview with the EAD. I had that interview scheduled, and after this happened, on the day of my interview, they canceled it on that day. Actually, 5 minutes before the interview happened, they canceled it, citing the LOE. The loss of effectiveness.
Jeez.
So, yeah. So it was like, insult to injury to injury to injury. It kept going. So, it was like, it wasn't enough that they removed me. They had to demote me, and it wasn't enough to do that. They had to keep me from, receiving a position that I had competed for and gotten. And then I was reassigned to the Washington Field Office at that point, the Northern Virginia Resident Agency. So this whole, and I really do believe it was retaliation for speaking up. There were a couple of other things that I spoke up about when I was at Training Division. Like, if you remember, Mark, there was an email that went down from the AD regarding attendance at the special emphasis months. You have Black History Month, Hispanic History, Women's Month, and all of that. Mm-hmm. And the edict kind of went down to say, hey, these things will be attended, even if you have to take new agents out of their classrooms, out of whatever you're teaching them. If we have a speaker that's coming to speak on this particular, special emphasis month, then they need to be there. Everybody needs to drop what they're doing and go to the auditorium and listen, because they were so poorly attended. And I wrote back, and this was the this was the other section chief, another section chief there at Training Division. I wrote back to her and I said, "Hey, listen, I don't have an objection to this in theory, but come June, you may have some people that have religious objections to coming to celebrate LGBTQIA month." And she wrote back and said, "Well, we'll burn that bridge when we come to it." Of course, if that email got sent up the chain, that is my raising a concern about that, got sent up the chain to Janet Cameraman, that could have been another motive, because Janet Cameraman, the EAD at the time, was the first gay or lesbian person appointed to that position. So anyway, I might have mentioned before, the loss of effectiveness finding is not appealable. You cannot appeal this decision that you receive, even if it's totally false. You cannot appeal it. It's like a blank check for the FBI leadership to be able to move people around. It's called a management-directed reassignment, and it's just loss of effectiveness fed right into that. But I responded, and so did the other unit chiefs and the section chief. We all kind of wrote up our response and sent it to the Office of Integrity and Compliance. We sent it to the Ombudsman. We sent it to a lot of people we thought would care within the FBI, and it just wouldn't take. I mean, nobody. We got a lot of how would you say? People that were very sympathetic to our cause and sympathetic to the fact that this happened. But like the Ombudsman, I mean, they have no power to do anything. Same with OIC, Office of Integrity and Compliance. I mean, all they can do is kind of is promote maybe policies in the future where this wouldn't happen again. So this came to the attention of Senator Charles Grassley of Iowa, who had been his staff had been investigating other instances of LOE abuses or inspection coming down and just handing out these things to people that they're told to hand out to. So I connected with him. He saw my case as kind of a poster boy of what's wrong with that process, because it was so egregious that he invited me to testify in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee, which I did in March of 2015. But, before that, let me back up and just kind of summarize what the findings were. The three main findings against me were, one, they did not find the addendum, the Achieving Results Addendum, if you recall what that was, the Achieving Results Addendum that you attach to someone's performance plan. They did not find that in my unit, in the paperwork that I had filed with the admin folks, right? But they didn't ask for it. They didn't find it, but they also didn't ask for it, as I learned later. It was all there. Of course, it was all there. The other finding against me was that I had removed an instructor, one of my instructors, from instruction, and then I turned around and gave him an excellent performance appraisal, which I did actually remove an instructor. He was a problem, and I had to remove him from the classroom. But they named the wrong person in their findings. They actually named the wrong instructor. And so when they went to that instructor's file and saw an excellent performance appraisal, of course, but that instructor that they named, he was a good instructor. And by the way, he was very upset that he was made part of these findings and now part of a government record that he was that he had been removed. So he was very upset.
So let me get this straight.
Mm-hmm.
So you had investigators that came in, and they with this particular, because I actually do remember this being discussed at the time. Again, I was in another unit, and FBI agents are a lot like junior high school girls. No offense to junior high school girls, but there's a lot of gossip. But what I'd heard was that, you had removed an instructor for lack of performance or whatever the reasoning was. You had to remove an instructor. And the claim from the inspectors was, wait a minute, you saw fit to remove this instructor, but during and just so the listeners know, as an FBI agent, you get a yearly performance rating. Okay. And so the inspectors came in and said, but yes, Rick, you removed this instructor, but then you turned around and rated this instructor as outstanding. But the problem with that was the instructor that they were talking about receiving the outstanding marks from you was a different instructor. It was not the instructor that you removed. Do I have that correct?
That's exactly what
So
happened.
They got that wrong. And then they said that you didn't give this addendum to the performance appraisal or performance plan, rather, for your instructors for the coming year. But it, in fact, was there. So, and this is 2 out of 3 that and these were reasons why they removed you from your position.
That's exactly right.
But they never verified. They never verified the information. So that's 2. And what was the third one?
Well, the third one was that I had not been supportive. I did not support Training Division's mission and reorganization. And what they didn't know is that I actually, during my tenure there, actually received 2 awards for helping to develop Training Division's mission. So, their evidence for not supporting the Training Division mission is that I had my instructors actually update their lesson plans. I had them actually reach out to the units at headquarters, the relevant units, and update the content for their lesson plans. And according to the inspectors, that task was left only to the curriculum management section. Okay? Mm-hmm. So in other words, what they were saying is, you should not have been updating your lesson plans. That's somebody else's job, and therefore now you are in non-compliance with the Training Division's mission, and et cetera, et cetera. Of course, that's ridiculous, because in that flip book that I had mentioned earlier, there were several units that, in that little paragraph that they got us, that they used to describe all of the units. There are several units that were actually, as part of their, I guess, mission and scope, was to develop and deliver curriculum. And so, when I brought all this to Senator Grassley, and he looked at the documentation, he looked at the fact that, the instructor was misnamed, the addendums were actually there, and his staff actually reached out to Training Division and verified all of this. He came back and wrote a very nice letter to the FBI director and said, look, what this person is being accused of, this person who received a loss of effectiveness, the whole basis of it is false. The whole basis of it is contradicted by the FBI's own documents. That's what Senator Grassley said. Mm-hmm. So he said, how do you explain this? And by the way, I asked Senator Grassley to ask the FBI for their loss of effectiveness policy to see if it was in conformance with their policy. And so he did. He said, hey, Ed, I want you to send us your policy. Well, time went by, several months went by, and the FBI, as is their custom, they kind of ignored him for a while. And then he got tired and he said, you know what, we're going to have a hearing on this, the FBI whistleblower reprisal hearing, and we're going to get to the bottom of this. And FBI, you're going to come here, you're going to send a representative. And he invited me to be part of that hearing and to share my story. And he said, we're going to get this out in the open. And the fact was that the FBI at that time did not have a loss of effectiveness policy. Like I said, this was a blank check for FBI leadership to be able to remove people anytime they wanted. They could make up facts and they knew that it's not an appealable process. It's not like OPR, Office of Professional Responsibility. It's not like if I had stolen drugs out of the drug vault, or if I had solicited a prostitute or got a DUI, drunk driving or whatever. Those things are appealable. Okay, I could appeal those findings, but a loss of effectiveness finding was not appealable, and so there was no place to go, and there's no way to rectify it. So Senator Grassley held this hearing, and the night before I testified, the evening before I testified, the FBI sent over the FBI's first loss of effectiveness policy.
Wow.
And yes, the night before. Now, according to the FBI, I spoke to some of the leadership afterwards, Pat Kelly, who was the Office of Integrity and Compliance Assistant Director at the time, and he said, well, that's just a coincidence.
Sure.
All these years, no policy. The night before I testified, they came up with a policy. And I verified through the metadata on that policy on our system, I verified that it had indeed been created and approved in the 2 days prior to my testimony.
Oh my God.
And I actually brought that up at the hearing. I actually, one of the, in response to one of the senator's questions at the end, I said, well, one of the problems is that we didn't even have a loss of effectiveness policy until last night, and I held it up.
Oh my God.
Yes. So basically what had happened in my case is I did my write-up. It didn't take, and anybody with the FBI. So I went to OIG. I went to the Office of Inspector General, and I made my case there. The Office Inspector General said, they did their analysis, and they said, well, basically, you have to meet 3 thresholds for this to be whistleblower retaliation. In other words, it has to be an actual disclosure of wrongdoing. The wrongdoing has to have affected you in an adverse way, an adverse personnel action, and you would have had to have made your whistleblower disclosure to an appropriate person according to 28 CFR 27.1a. And that's kind of burned into my brain because I've been through this process. So OIG came back and said, we have determined that this is not a whistleblower disclosure, or you are not protected. Okay, they admitted, hey, something bad happened here, obviously, because of the misinformation that was used against you. But we can't prove retaliation. We can't prove that it was retaliation. We can't show it was retaliation. And by the way, you didn't report it to the right person according to 28 CFR 27.1a. So in other words, according to that statute, if you could imagine this for your listeners, according to that statute, a person at training division would have had to make a disclosure of wrongdoing to the deputy director or the director himself. Just reporting wrongdoing to a supervisor or a section chief or deputy assistant director or assistant director, all those people, it doesn't matter. It's not protected. It's only protected if you're in a headquarters division, which is training division is one of them. You had to have made that disclosure to the deputy director or the director himself.
But you're talking about let me just stop you there for a second. But You're talking about an organization that tells you from day one to follow your chain of command.
That's exactly right.
You were told to absolutely not reach out in such a way to a deputy director or to the director.
And that's exactly right.
So it's beaten into your head. And I'd be curious to see where in the hell is that ever been written that's the policy. I've never seen that. In over 20 years in the FBI, I never saw that.
Are you talking about the statute?
The statute, and that's the procedure. That if you have a complaint of wrongdoing, that you're supposed to go to the director or a deputy director. It was always beaten in my head that you never do that.
That's exactly right.
But now they're penalizing you for not doing that.
That's one of the reasons. One, because my case was so egregious, but two, the reason why my whistleblower reprisal complaint was knocked down from OIG, and then later on appeal, I appealed it to an organization called OARM, which is the Office of Attorney Recruitment and Management. I appealed it to them. They are the appellate authority. It's like a court for FBI whistleblower complaints. And they sided with me in saying, yes, you disclosed real wrongdoing. Yes, we know that wrongdoing directly impacted adversely and impacted you in an adverse personnel action. We know that, but you did not make your disclosure to one of the appropriate recipients according to 28 CFR 27.1A. And so that was the ridiculousness of it, right? I mean, the technicality of all technicalities. And so that's what I was sharing at this hearing, at the Judiciary Committee hearing. And I can tell you, and your listeners can look it up on C-SPAN as well. It was all recorded. Both Republicans and Democrats on that committee were disgusted. They were really disgusted. I wasn't the only one on the panel. We had Mike German, who was a former agent also that went through something similar with whistleblower. And you had some other people on the panel. You had an attorney, a whistleblower attorney there that was speaking on behalf of his clients. Here's the thing. There've only been, up to that point, in all the whistleblower reprisal cases, there's only been 3 in the history of the FBI where they have sided with, or I should say, where the complainant, the victim of whistleblower reprisal, actually won. And they took an average of 10 years each to get to that point. The grand majority of reprisal complaints to the leadership in the FBI are just slapped down, squashed, hidden, covered up. This is one of the points that I brought up to Director Comey when he was still with us. I sent him an email, and because he sent out one of his kind of folksy emails, saying, "Hey, there's zero tolerance for reprisal. We're so proud of our OPR system, and there's zero tolerance for reprisal." And I came back to him and I said, "Look, according to your own folks at headquarters, there's Stephen Kelly was the AD at the time for Office of Congressional Affairs. He reported out that between 2004 and 2012, I believe it was, 237 complaints of reprisal in the FBI. Only four cases where the evildoers were actually held to account. One of those persons was allowed to retire immediately, and the other 3, it was kind of bundled together with some abuse of authority and or abuse of position things, and they got like a slap on the wrist. They got a couple of weeks off. But by and large, if you can imagine, if you're in the FBI and you are a supervisor and let's say you're an evil supervisor, and you want to retaliate against someone, you can rest assured that there's a greater than 98% chance that you'll get away with it. Completely get away with it.
Wow.
And I said that to Director Comey in this email. And he, I never forget what he said, but he actually responded back to me, and he said that he said, "Every time I'm able to reach below the surface of statistics or case headlines and look at the details of individual cases, I see a system that, although imperfect like all human systems, is working pretty darn well and fair to folks."
Okay, you know what, Rick, I'm going to say that because I've brought this up in other podcasts before, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think it's important for listeners to understand here, because I have found in my travels and my discussions with people, and while I taught at the National Academy, and these are all police executives that come from all over the world, and what I found with people is that most people don't understand that the FBI director, not just James Comey, but none of them, with the exception of Louis Freeh, none of them were agents. Okay.
Right.
So people need to understand that the FBI director, no matter how well-intentioned he was, and at the time that you're talking about, James Comey was still held in high regard. They don't understand the system because they didn't grow up in the system. James Comey was a political appointee that was brought in. He took over an organization that he'd never worked in before. So it's important for the listeners to understand that when James Comey makes a statement like he did to you, it is out of absolute ignorance of the FBI system. And all of our listeners right now have just heard more of an explanation as to how the FBI system works than James Comey ever knew. Right? Would you agree with that, Rick?
Oh, absolutely.
So he does not know. It's not even possible for James Comey to have understood what you were talking about. Not even possible.
Right. He just thought, hey, there's another person complaining, an agent who said he was screwed or whatever, just complaining, and
right.
Hey,
and just a simple check of the facts, just like the three facts that you brought. Two, actually, you could look at two of them. The one with the addendum that wasn't there, and two, the fact that they held you accountable when they were talking about the wrong agent that had been removed from the classroom. I'll tell you what, as a manager myself, as a leader myself, I would have looked at that when I saw those two flags alone, and then throw in the third one that you had. I would have had somebody in my office saying, "I want you to go through everything with me because I just found 3 mistakes. What the hell is going on here? And how?" So if you're wrong about those 3 things, then what other things are you wrong about? Okay. Right. Now, not to change the topic, but I'll just throw in there real quick. We just found out that there were significant errors in 17 different FISAs that James Comey himself signed off on. So people need to understand that what you're talking about predates by several years the incidents going on today. But this should scare the hell out of people that business is conducted this way in the DOJ. It should scare the hell out of people. Anyway, I didn't mean to interject there, but it really just is just baffling to me that this was allowed to happen. But
yeah, so you have the incompetence of it or the ignorance of it, but I think it's even deeper on the level of just complete lack of integrity, right? So in trying to raise this, what happened to me, what happened in my particular case, and what's happening to people in general with these LOEs. We have kind of a support network amongst us. So we have I have about 30 people that I keep up with. They've all been victims of LOEs, and they were all rooting for me. They're all cheering for me and rooting for me and everything. But in the midst of all of this and trying to do things the right way, stay within the FBI, raise it with our internal investigations, and say, hey, this is wrong. I mentioned Pat Kelly, who was the assistant director at the time. We had an email exchange, several email exchanges actually, and the Office of Integrity and Compliance has no power to actually affect, make people change or make the FBI, provide a remedy or anything like that. But he did say this to me, and this is a quote. He said, if the IG, the Inspector General, if the IG finds that your LOE was falsely procured, then I'm sure he'll say so. And he went on to commit to this. He said, if the IG finds fault with the process, then the FBI will take appropriate action. So here's the top guy at the Office of Integrity and Compliance. He's making this commitment. He said, on the surface, it looks bad, but the IG is still looking at the process, and if they find that the loss of effectiveness process that resulted in your demotion and all of that, if they find something wrong with the process, then of course the FBI is going to take appropriate action. Well, the IG did, in fact, in their second report. The first report was about retaliation. They couldn't prove retaliation because I did not make my whistleblower disclosure to the right person. But they did actually, to their credit, follow up on the process itself. And they said that my LOE was falsely procured. They said it was unfair, it was unreasonable, it was harsh, and they went into great detail as to why. And I won't go into those details right now, but it's basically what you had just kind of summarized. They named the wrong instructor. The addendums were actually there. All of that stuff. They found that my loss of effectiveness finding was actually based on nothing. And then at the end of the report, they said, "Hey, FBI, we are providing this report so that you can make the appropriate remedy." They didn't mandate or order the FBI to make a remedy, but they're providing all of these details so that the FBI would make a remedy. I met with the executive assistant director at the time in a mediation meeting, actually, and brought this up, and he told me that he shook my hand and he said, "I know something bad happened to you based on these details." And he shook my hand, he looked me in the eye, and he said, "And I commit to you, I'm going to find out what in the world happened. We're going to make this right." And he never did. He never did.
Sure.
He never did. So, as I get closer and closer to retirement, right? I mean, I retired in July of 2019. So I kept up, I would send him a little email. He wouldn't respond. I would reach out to the assistant director of human resources division, and, he would punt it. He would say, "Hey, I understand you're trying to, dig this back up, but the FBI is not going to do anything else." I even sent it to the deputy director, and this is infuriating. Okay, you talk about integrity. The deputy director of the FBI. I sent him everything. I sent him letters from Grassley. I sent him the findings from OARM. I sent him the findings from OIG, and all of them, said that what happened was baseless. Okay, it was wrong. It was absolutely wrong. And his reply back to me, is very flippant. Actually, it was only like a couple of sentences. He said, "The FBI," this is what he said, quote, "the FBI is not willing to take any additional actions." And he said, "We have complied with our legal obligations." And that was it. And so after that,
which deputy director was this, by the way?
David Bowditch.
David Bowditch. Okay.
Yeah, David Bowditch. So, you hear great things about some of these leaders that have made it up that far, but when you, of course, he in his reply to me via email, he's copying, the Office of General Counsel, our lawyers, and I'm sure they're the ones that kind of crafted this. But basically, what that tells me is that unless the FBI is mandated to do so by a court or by something strong like that, they're not going to do the right thing. There's no internal integrity meter. There's no internal compass of right and wrong. It's just integrity means basically whatever you can get away with. Hey, nobody's mandating us to do this. We have complied with our legal obligations, so we consider this matter closed.
That is absolutely stunning. I don't know if it's stunning to people that have worked within the system for quite some time, but I hope our listeners are listening very closely to what you're saying here. And that is, have we not again seen this over the last several years, that the Bureau will not respond unless forced to? Things are not going to be turned over willingly. And, Rick, I think what really stands out to me is this, and people need to understand this. This is being done to employees. These are people inside the organization. So if you're not inside the organization and there's been wrongdoing been done to you, what chance in the world do you have of getting any remedy? That's kind of, think about that for a minute. That's astounding.
Yeah,
Don't
it
you think?
is, and absolutely, and just the false statements. I mean, once you're confronted with the fact that someone was wrongly, wrongly demoted, wrongly punished for facts that just weren't true, at some point, you got to say, well, we need to correct the record. I mean, this you can't let these falsehoods stand in official government documents. You would think that. But they made no effort to correct the record. And I mean, these statements are so false. If it were a public citizen, okay, say Martha Stewart, who was prosecuted for what? False statements, right? USC 1001 false statements. For someone who is making false statements to the FBI, they can be prosecuted. But FBI agents making false statements in their own documents, nothing happens.
Yeah.
And it is actually, and I brought this up in a letter that I wrote to Director Ray before I left. I said, look, just this part, if you take everything else away, just putting false statements, knowingly putting false statements into these documents and not correcting them, it's not only an OPR violation, internal violation, but it's a violation of 18 USC 10,018, or the statute that describes official certificates or writings, which says that a public officer cannot knowingly make a writing or a statement that he knows to be false. Otherwise, it's prosecutable. And so I put this also into my letter to Director Ray at the time. To his credit, he did respond. He said, "This troubles me." And he sent it to the Office of General Counsel. And the Office of General Counsel at the FBI then said, we are referring this to OIG. And OIG said, we're not going to be pursuing this. And so that's it.
God. Oh, I am sorry. I laugh because as soon as you said that, I'm like, and it was sent to a black hole and it has died. that was going to be my reaction to that. It's sad. It's sad that's where we are right now. Mm-hmm. And so what you're telling me is that these documents, these false documents that you've mentioned, they are still there. This record has not been corrected. As we sit here today talking about this has not been corrected.
That is correct. That is absolutely correct.
Wow.
The document, the loss of effectiveness finding document that contains these false statements, I know it's still in our electronic system of record. I know it is, even though I don't have access to it, because you can do a search for keywords that I know that are in it, exact phrases, like long phrases that I know that were in it because I've seen the drafts. And it is still there. It was there right before I left. So it has not been corrected. They have not. Well, I mean, I just read to you the quote from Bowditch. I mean, they have no interest in actually righting a wrong that they committed themselves. They have no interest in doing that unless they're compelled to legally. But we talked about this before we went on, but there are some positives out of this. And the reason why I wanted to share this and is that there were some positives, and that is the FBI did not have a loss of effectiveness policy at the time. They do now. They do now because of what I went through. The FBI now has an FBI whistleblower protection web-based training. You're welcome.
Because I always enjoyed all the web-based training that we had to sit through. I would sit at my desk and I'd say, what my big regret in my FBI career is? I don't do enough online training. That's my biggest regret. I wish I'd have had more training. But thank you. Thank you. That was good. Yeah. But some of it is necessary, and this is one of those necessary ones. There's a whole lot that was not necessary. But
it's funny, when that first came out, they got it completely wrong. and the reason why they even have it at all is because of the ADD, or the assistant deputy director's testimony on the panel immediately following my testimony, was that we did. He testified in Congress. I mean, in the Senate Judiciary Committee, he testified that we already had whistleblower training. And he said that was included in the No Fear Act training. And of course, No Fear Act training has nothing to do with whistleblower training. And I brought that up, and I actually got back with Senator Grassley's staff, and I said, nope. And I gave them evidence to show that No Fear Act has nothing to do with whistleblower training. And then 3 weeks after that, we had this web-based training for whistleblower protection, which the first iteration they got wrong, and I had them correct it. But one of the stronger things that came out of this, positive things that came out of this, is that the FBI now has the FBI Whistleblower Protection Enhancement Act of 2016. So in other words, the reason why my whistleblower reprisal claim was rejected, and that is I did not make my disclosure to the appropriate person, according to 28 CFR 27.1a, that has now been corrected. Now, going forward, since President Obama actually signed it right before he left office, the FBI employee, any FBI employee, is able to make a disclosure of wrongdoing to their supervisor or anyone in their chain of command, going all the way up. They can also make a disclosure of wrongdoing to anyone in Congress, to anyone in Inspection Division. And so the protections
That's
for
a big
actual
change, yeah.
Yes. So, I feel like, it was overall, it was a stressful experience, but going forward, I think the FBI, at least this part of the FBI, is a little bit better. In there, they now have a dedicated FBI whistleblower policy directive where they didn't have it before. The LOE policy now states that the person receiving a loss of effectiveness finding can now have I think it's 10 days. It's not a whole lot, but at least they give you the opportunity to respond. And the only person who makes this decision on loss of effectiveness finding now, it's not Inspection Division, it's the Assistant Director of Human Resources Division. So they've taken that power away from Inspection Division. So it's, so I can kind of take solace in the fact that the FBI is a little bit better as a result of me going through this. I have no expectation the FBI is ever going to make things right with me, but I know that the people that I left behind, the good people that I left behind at the FBI, at least they can take advantage of this. I hope that they're aware of it, of their rights now as FBI whistleblowers.
Well, I'll tell you what, and I really appreciate you sharing this story. And I guess the final question for everyone listening today is, so what's the future with your case? Are you still pursuing this? What does the future hold?
Well, this particular case is basically done because they will not go back and say, hey, you are now in what you did is in compliance with today's law, but it was not in compliance with the law at the time. So there's no way it can be remedied that way. I would have to, retain a private attorney, and I don't even know employee law well enough to know that whether or not I can bring action just based on wrongful demotion. I don't even know what it would be. To me, the real value is making people aware of the leadership of the FBI, and a lot of those people are still around. A lot of the people that did this are still around in the FBI. They're still, they're in other types of trouble now, but but
yes,
I think people need to. I think people need to realize FBI still has a lot of great brand recognition and brand loyalty, but they're human beings. And the human beings at the top of the organization are not the the cream of the cream, let's say.
No, and what's interesting about this is that stories like yours can get lost in the bigger picture because, as you said, a lot of the people that you're talking about are in trouble as we speak now, and we all know what's going on the national scene. The problem is, I think, as Americans, we get hyper focused on those issues, and we forget that the same people were what you're seeing on the national level. These types of sort of in micro incidents were happening to other people and had been happening all along.
Yes.
And now the public, just over the last few years, the public is becoming aware of this stuff. But Rick, you and I knew about this all along because it was happening to people like us all along. And now the public is catching on to this. And so if there's anyone listening to this program that is in Congress, in DOJ, somebody from the administration, the president even, whoever happens to be listening to this broadcast, you need to understand many of these people are still there. And it is absolutely unjust that this happened to you. And it's unforgivable that those documents that you're talking about that mischaracterize you and are wrong, they are factually incorrect, are still in the system. And that has to be right. Of course, you could go through litigation. You could hire a lawyer and demand it. But frankly, Rick, we shouldn't have to do that. If it's wrong and everybody looks at it and agrees that this was wrong, then it should be fixed. I shouldn't have to hire an attorney. You should not have to hire an attorney to get this fixed. And that's what that needs to be understood. And I hope somebody out there in a position that can look at this will look at this. Because, folks, it's important when we're talking about the FBI, if these things can get wrong and investigate internal investigations of employees, and it's not, you need to demand that we do better work, because you got to remember the business of the FBI is to do investigations of the country and be involved in criminal investigations, counterintelligence investigations, counterterrorism investigations. And if we are not getting these details correct, then we can't get details correct in other investigations. And this kind of shoddy work cannot be tolerated. Period. Cannot be. So I hope it gets rectified at some point.
Yes. And it's even more distressing to know that the leaders are still there and they're grooming other leaders just like themselves, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So,
well,
it's just a cycle.
It is. And well, Rick, I really appreciate you coming on the program today, and we can continue the conversation on because I find it fascinating, and I know our listeners do too. But thanks for being on the show tonight.
Well, thank you very much. It was fun. I appreciate the microphone.
Yeah, not a problem. And really have enjoyed it. I know the listeners are enjoying this, and we'll continue on the conversation on another time. But, for folks that are out there listening tonight, I hope that you'll reach out to your congressman, congresswoman, and do something about this, and just be aware of this, and just do whatever you can to keep the pressure on those in leadership to right these wrongs and pay attention. And elections do matter. Hopefully the president will do something. Well, he's already done some things about the leadership over in the FBI, but hopefully he will continue on after the election. And no matter who's in office, I'll just throw that out there. But I really appreciate you listening. And folks, once again, check out our Facebook site. Give us a like, give us a follow. Pass this on far and wide. This show is your vaccine. It's FDA approved, 100% accuracy. And, we are out to vaccinate the public on all the wrongs that are being done out there in America today. And thanks again. And this is Mark Vines. Thank you again, Rick Kiper. And we will talk with you soon.
Thank you very much, Mark.